I was arranging the flowers for our annual family dinner, the same yellow roses Mom had loved since I was little. Madison used to help me with these preparations, laughing as we debated centerpiece placement. We were the picture-perfect sisters everyone envied. She was my confidant, my shopping partner, my closest friend. But lately, something had shifted in her eyes when she looked at me, a darkness I could not quite place. As I placed the final rose, I never imagined that the person I loved most in this world would become the architect of my destruction. Before I share this nightmare with you, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Please hit like if you believe the truth always finds a way to surface. This story will shake you to your core, but the ending will restore your faith in justice. Subscribe, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. Our family had always been the envy of our neighborhood in Austin, Texas. Dad worked as a senior accountant at a prestigious firm downtown, while Mom managed her own successful catering business from our spacious colonial home. At 28, I had built a solid career as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup, finally feeling like I was making my parents proud. Madison, 4 years younger, was finishing her senior year at the University of Texas, majoring in communications with dreams of becoming a journalist. Growing up, Madison and I were inseparable despite our age gap. Every weekend, we would drive to the outlet malls, spending hours trying on clothes and sharing secrets over frozen yogurt. She confided in me about her first boyfriend, her college struggles, her career aspirations. I helped her through her teenage heartbreaks and celebrated her academic achievements. Our parents often joked that we were more like best friends than sisters, and they were right. Our house on Maple Street represented everything good about middle-class American life. The wraparound porch where we held lemonade stands as children, the backyard, where Dad taught us to throw a football, the kitchen island, where Mom taught us her secret cookie recipes. Family photos lined the hallway, capturing decades of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and summer vacations to Lake Travis. Everyone who entered our home commented on the warmth and love that filled every corner. But 3 months ago, something began to change. Madison started declining our sister dates, claiming she was too busy with her thesis. When I texted her funny memes or asked about her day, her responses became short and distant. She stopped joining our family for Sunday dinners, always having some excuse about study groups or work obligations. The sister who once called me daily to share every detail of her life suddenly became a stranger living under the same roof. When I tried to address her withdrawal, Madison would brush off my concerns with vague explanations. She claimed she was stressed about graduation, worried about finding a job, having relationship troubles with her boyfriend Jake. But her eyes held something darker than academic pressure. There was an anger there, a resentment I had never seen before. She would look at me during family gatherings with an expression I could not decipher, as if I had somehow wronged her in ways I could not understand. Mom and Dad noticed the change too. During our weekly family dinners, Madison would sit silently picking at her food, while the rest of us chatted about our weeks. When they asked about her classes or her job search, she would give one-word answers and excuse herself early. The daughter, who once filled our dining room with laughter and animated stories, had become a shadow of herself, and none of us knew why. The breaking point came on a Friday evening in late October. Our family had gathered for our usual end-of-week pizza night, a tradition we had maintained since Madison and I were in elementary school. The autumn air was crisp, and Mom had made her famous apple cider to accompany our meal. Dad was telling us about a funny client interaction when Madison suddenly started crying. We all froze our conversation, stopping mid-sentence. Madison rarely cried, even as a child, and seeing her break down so completely sent a chill through the room. Mom immediately moved to comfort her, but Madison pulled away, wiping her tears with shaking hands. She looked around the table at all of us, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. She said she needed to tell us something important, something that had been eating at her for months. The way she spoke with a tremor in her voice and her hands clenched into fists made my stomach drop. Dad set down his pizza slice and leaned forward, his face creased with concern. Mom reached across the table to take Madison's hand, but she pulled away again, shaking her head. Madison announced she would tell us everything over the weekend when she had gathered the courage to speak the words aloud. She stood up abruptly, leaving her dinner untouched, and went upstairs to her room. We heard her door slam, and then silence fell over our dining room like a heavy blanket. None of us finished eating that night. I lay awake until 3 a.m., staring at my ceiling and trying to imagine what could be troubling my sister so deeply. Was she pregnant? Had she been in an accident? Was Jake abusing her? My mind raced through every possible scenario, each one worse than the last. I considered knocking on her door, forcing her to talk to me the way we used to handle problems together. But something in her demeanor that evening warned me to give her space. Sunday morning arrived with deceptive beauty. The October sun streamed through our kitchen windows as Mom prepared her famous blueberry pancakes, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Dad sat at the breakfast table reading his paper, but I noticed his hands shaking slightly as he turned the pages. We were all on edge, waiting for Madison to make good on her promise to reveal whatever had been tormenting her. At exactly 10 a.m., Madison appeared in the doorway, wearing an oversized sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she clutched a tissue box against her chest like armor. She asked us all to sit in the living room because she had something important to share. The gravity in her voice made my blood run cold. We gathered on the familiar furniture where we had shared countless family moments. Dad sat in his leather recliner, Mom perched on the edge of the sofa, and I curled up in the corner spot I had claimed since childhood. Madison remained standing by the fireplace, her back to the family photos that documented our happy years together. What happened next shattered everything I thought I knew about Truth Family and the person I had been my entire life. Madison began to cry again, her shoulders shaking as she struggled to form words. She said she could not keep living with the secret anymore, that it was destroying her ability to function normally. She talked about feeling dirty, ashamed, unable to trust anyone. My parents leaned forward, their faces etched with worry and confusion. Then she turned to face me directly, and the words that came out of her mouth felt like physical blows. She accused me of inappropriate touching that had supposedly been occurring since we were children. She described scenarios that were so detailed and disturbing that I felt physically ill listening to them. She claimed I had been manipulating and abusing her for years, using my position as the older sister to silence her protests. The room exploded into chaos. Dad jumped to his feet, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and devastation. Mom started sobbing, clutching her chest as if she was having a heart attack. I sat frozen in my corner, my mouth open, but no words coming out. The accusation was so completely false, so utterly unthinkable, that my brain could not process what was happening. I finally found my voice denying everything with desperate intensity. I reminded them of who I was, the sister who had protected Madison from bullies, who had driven her to friends' houses and helped with homework. I begged them to remember our relationship, the love and support we had always shared. But Madison had prepared for my denials. She produced a leather-bound journal, claiming it contained years of documented abuse. She showed them text messages on her phone that seemed to support her story conversations I supposedly had with her that made my skin crawl to hear. The evidence looked convincing to anyone who did not know the truth, and I watched my parents' faces crumble as they struggled to reconcile the daughter they knew with the monster Madison was describing. Dad demanded to know why she had never told them before. Madison explained that I had threatened her, convinced her that no one would believe her, made her feel like the abuse was somehow her fault. She spoke about feeling trapped and powerless, about wanting to protect the family from the truth. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, complete with trembling voice and streaming tears. Mom asked me directly if any of it was true, and I looked into her eyes as I swore on everything sacred that I had never hurt Madison in any way. But doubt had already taken root. They were caught between believing their older daughter, who had never given them reason to question her character, and their younger daughter, who was sobbing and begging them to believe her pain. The conversation stretched for hours, going in circles, as I maintained my innocence, and Madison insisted on her version of events. Finally, Dad made a decision that felt like the final nail in my coffin. He asked me to pack a bag and stay somewhere else while they figured out what to do next. He said they needed time to process everything and decide how to move forward as a family. I stared at him in shock, unable to believe that the man who had taught me to ride a bike and helped with my college tuition was asking me to leave home based on lies. But the doubt in his eyes was unmistakable, and I realized that arguing further would only make me look more guilty. With as much dignity as I could muster, I went upstairs to pack my belongings. Standing in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by photos and mementos from our family trips and celebrations, I felt like I was watching my life disintegrate in real time. Everything I had built, every relationship I treasured, was being destroyed by someone I would have died to protect. I threw clothes into a suitcase with shaking hands, trying to understand how Madison could look me in the eye and lie so convincingly about something so serious. The drive to the budget motel across town was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I kept expecting my phone to ring with an apology, an explanation, anything that would make sense of what had just happened. But my phone remained silent as I checked into a dingy room that smelled like disinfectant and despair. Within 48 hours, my entire world had collapsed. Word of the accusation spread through our extended family like wildfire, and suddenly, I was receiving calls from aunts and cousins demanding explanations I could not give. My boss called me into her office Monday morning, explaining that they had received an anonymous tip about my situation and felt it would be best if I took indefinite leave while things got sorted out. Friends I had known since high school stopped returning my calls. My college roommate blocked me on social media after seeing cryptic posts from Madison about finding the courage to speak her truth. The man I had been casually dating for 3 months sent a single text message saying he could not see me anymore, with no further explanation needed. By the end of the week, I was completely alone in a way I had never experienced before. The isolation was suffocating, made worse by the knowledge that my own sister was the architect of my destruction. I spent my days in that motel room, alternating between rage and despair, trying to understand what I had done to deserve such a calculated betrayal. The worst part was not knowing why. Madison and I had never fought seriously about anything. I had always supported her dreams, defended her choices, shared my success with her whenever possible. If she needed money, I would have given it to her. If she was struggling with something, I would have helped her find solutions. The random cruelty of her accusation made no sense. As the reality of my situation sank in, I realized that sitting in that motel room crying was not going to restore my life or my reputation. If I was going to survive this nightmare, I needed to fight back with every resource at my disposal. Madison had planned her attack carefully, but she had also made mistakes. I just needed to find them. The first step in rebuilding my life was acknowledging that my sister had become my enemy, a reality so painful it felt like mourning a death. But I could not afford to grieve for the relationship we used to have. I needed to investigate the woman Madison had become and uncover the truth behind her devastating lies. I started by retracing the timeline of Madison's behavioral changes, looking for clues I had missed in my concern for her well-being. Using my laptop, I began documenting every interaction we had over the past 6 months, searching for patterns or motivations that might explain her actions. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Madison's withdrawal had not begun randomly 3 months ago. It had started immediately after she learned that I had received a substantial promotion at work, complete with a salary bump that would allow me to start saving for a house. She had congratulated me at the time, hugging me and expressing pride in my achievement. But looking back, I remembered something hollow in her eyes, even then. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Rodriguez, with the last of my savings a former police detective who specialized in family disputes and false allegations. Marcus was expensive, but he understood the urgency of my situation and the devastating impact these accusations were having on every aspect of my life. He assured me that truth has a way of surfacing when you know where to look for it. Marcus began by examining Madison's financial records, social media activity, and personal relationships. What he uncovered within the first week was more disturbing than I had imagined. Madison had been living a secret life funded by credit cards and personal loans, accumulating debt that would have shocked our parents into immediate action. The gambling addiction started small, with occasional trips to the casino with college friends. But over the past year, it had escalated into online poker games and sports betting that consumed most of her free time and all of her available money. She owed significant amounts to multiple creditors, including some very dangerous people who had begun making threats about collection methods. Marcus showed me bank statements that revealed the extent of Madison's financial desperation. She had maxed out 4 credit cards, taken predatory loans at impossible interest rates, and even borrowed money from classmates using fabricated sob stories about family emergencies. The total amount she owed was more than twice what our parents made in a year. But the most damning evidence came from Madison's own phone and computer. Marcus had obtained recordings of conversations between Madison and her best friend Chloe, where she discussed her plan to manipulate our family into giving her money. In one particularly chilling conversation, Madison explicitly stated that she needed to find a way to make me look bad so that our parents would redirect their financial support toward her instead. The recording that broke my heart was Madison telling Chloe that she had always resented my success, feeling like our parents loved me more because I was more accomplished and responsible. She talked about feeling invisible next to me, believing that the only way to get the attention and support she craved was to destroy my reputation completely. Marcus also discovered that the journal Madison had shown our parents was recently purchased with entries backdated, using different pens and handwriting styles to create the illusion of years of documentation. The text messages on her phone had been fabricated using a second device, creating fake conversations that made it appear as though I had been grooming and threatening her. Most shocking of all was security camera footage from our neighborhood that proved I had not even been home during several of the incidents Madison described in her accusation. On one date, she claimed I had cornered her in her bedroom. I was actually attending a work conference in Dallas with hotel receipts and witness testimonies to prove it. Armed with this evidence, I felt a mixture of vindication and heartbreak. I had proof that Madison was lying, but I also had confirmation that my own sister had deliberately and methodically planned my destruction. The betrayal was so complete that it took me days to process the emotional implications of what she had done. Marcus advised me to confront Madison directly before involving our parents, giving her the opportunity to confess and minimize the damage to our family. I was reluctant to face her alone, knowing how convincingly she could lie, but I also knew that this conversation was necessary for my own healing process. I arranged to meet Madison at a neutral location, a coffee shop near her campus, where we used to study together during her freshman year. She arrived looking nervous but defiant, clearly suspecting that I had discovered something significant. When I placed the evidence in front of her, I watched her face cycle through shock, anger, and finally resignation. For the first time in months, I saw the real Madison beneath her elaborate deception. The gambling addiction had changed her into someone I barely recognized, desperate and willing to sacrifice everything for money she would only lose again. She tried to justify her actions by claiming I had everything while she had nothing, but even she seemed to realize how hollow that excuse sounded. When I played the recording of her confessing to Chloe about her plan, Madison completely broke down. She admitted that the accusation had started as a way to get money from our parents, but it had spiraled beyond her control. She had convinced herself that I deserved to suffer because life had always been easier for me. But seeing the destruction she had caused made her realize the magnitude of her betrayal. I felt no satisfaction in her tears or her confession. The damage was already done to my career, my relationships, and my standing in our community. But I also knew that without a full confession to our parents, I would never be able to begin rebuilding my life or restoring my reputation. Madison begged me not to destroy her life the way she had destroyed mine, promising to find another way to handle her debts if I would just let things fade away quietly. But I had learned too much about the depths of her deception to trust any promise she made. She had created this situation with calculated precision, and she would have to face the consequences with the same level of accountability. The family meeting I arranged for the following Sunday felt like a tribunal where I was finally getting the chance to present my defense. I had spent the week organizing all of Marcus's evidence into a comprehensive presentation that would leave no room for doubt about Madison's deception. My hands shook as I prepared to walk back into the house where I had been branded a monster and expelled from the family I loved. Mom and Dad looked exhausted when they opened the door, aged by weeks of stress and uncertainty about their daughter's conflicting stories. They hugged me tentatively, as if they wanted to believe in my innocence, but were afraid to fully embrace me until they knew the truth. Madison sat on the living room couch, looking pale and defeated, having already accepted that her lies were about to be exposed. I began by showing them the financial records that documented Madison's secret gambling addiction and mounting debts. Dad's face went white as he realized the extent of money Madison owed to dangerous people, while Mom covered her mouth in shock at the predatory loans and credit card abuse their daughter had hidden from them. The security camera footage that proved my alibis during Madison's alleged incidents was particularly effective in demonstrating how completely fabricated her timeline had been. I watched my parents' expressions change from confusion to understanding to anger as they realized how meticulously Madison had planned her deception. But the recording of Madison confessing her plan to Chloe was what finally broke through any remaining doubts. Hearing their daughter's voice, admitting that she had invented the abuse allegations purely for financial gain, was devastating for parents who had raised both of us to value honesty above everything else. Dad confronted Madison, directly demanding an explanation for how she could look him in the eye and lie about something so serious. Madison tried to deflect blame by talking about her gambling addiction as a disease that had clouded her judgment. But Dad was not interested in excuses for behavior that had nearly destroyed his other daughter's life. Mom was crying by the time Madison finally admitted the full scope of her deception, confessing that every detail of her accusation had been fabricated to manipulate their emotions and financial support. The woman who had raised us both to be strong, honest, and supportive of each other was watching her daughter reveal herself as someone capable of calculated cruelty. The apologies that followed felt hollow and inadequate compared to the damage that had been done. Madison begged for forgiveness from both our parents and me, promising to get help for her addiction and make amends however possible. But her tears felt manipulative after everything I had learned about her capacity for deception. When she asked if we could put this behind us and return to being a normal family, I realized how completely Madison still failed to understand the magnitude of what she had done. She seemed to think that a confession and some tears would erase the weeks I had spent in exile, the job I had lost, the friends who had abandoned me based on her lies. I told Madison that forgiveness would be a long process that would require more than words and promises. She would need to prove through consistent actions over time that she was genuinely committed to changing the behaviors that had led to such devastating choices. Trust once broken so completely could not be rebuilt with a single conversation. Dad announced that Madison would be moving out of the family home immediately and that all financial support for her education and living expenses would be terminated. She would need to find a job, pay her own debts, and seek professional help for her gambling addiction without any assistance from family resources that she had tried to manipulate through lies. The most difficult part of Madison's punishment was the requirement that she publicly correct the false narrative she had created about me. She would need to contact every person she had told about the abuse allegations, explaining that she had lied, and formally apologizing for the damage her false accusations had caused to my reputation. Madison protested that admitting her lies publicly would destroy her own reputation and make it impossible for her to rebuild relationships with friends and extended family. But Dad explained that she had made her choice when she decided to destroy my reputation with false allegations, and now she would experience the consequences of that decision. As the meeting concluded, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and emptiness. I had proven my innocence and exposed Madison's deception, but the victory felt hollow because it meant acknowledging that my sister had become someone capable of such calculated betrayal. The Madison I had loved and protected was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Mom and Dad apologized to me repeatedly, expressing shame about doubting my character and allowing Madison's lies to drive me from my family home. They begged me to move back in while I rebuilt my life, but I realized that I needed to establish independence from a family dynamic that had allowed such manipulation to occur. Instead, I accepted their offer to help me find a new apartment and begin rebuilding my career with their full support and advocacy. They promised to contact my former employer and anyone else who had been influenced by Madison's false allegations, providing character references and explanations that might help restore my professional reputation. The healing process would be long and complicated, requiring therapy to process the trauma of being betrayed by someone I had loved unconditionally. But for the first time in months, I felt hope that I could rebuild a life based on truth, rather than the elaborate fiction Madison had constructed around my character. 2 years have passed since the day Madison's lies were finally exposed, and the healing process has been more complex than I ever imagined. In the immediate aftermath of her confession, I felt an overwhelming need to rebuild my life away from the family dynamics that had allowed such manipulation to flourish. I accepted a marketing position with a startup company in Dallas, creating physical distance that helped me process the emotional trauma without constant reminders. Madison did follow through on some of her promises, at least initially. She moved out of our family home and found a job waiting tables at a chain restaurant, using her modest income to slowly pay down her debts and attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice a week. She also sent public apologies to extended family members and former friends, admitting that her abuse allegations had been completely fabricated. However, the consequences of her actions extended far beyond what any of us had anticipated. Madison found herself completely isolated from her peer group as word of her false accusations spread through social media and college networks. The friends who had initially supported her through what they believed was a trauma disclosure now viewed her as someone capable of devastating manipulation. Our extended family struggled to process the revelation that Madison had been willing to destroy her sister's reputation for money. Aunts and cousins who had initially distanced themselves from me sent awkward apologies, but many relationships remained permanently damaged by the doubt Madison's lies had introduced. Family gatherings became tense affairs where everyone avoided discussing the events that had nearly torn us apart. Madison's attempts at reconciliation with me followed a predictable pattern of emotional manipulation that demonstrated she had not fully learned from her mistakes. She would send lengthy text messages describing her therapy sessions and asking for forgiveness, followed by angry accusations that I was being cruel and unforgiving when I did not respond immediately. After 18 months of this cycle, Madison escalated her demands for reconciliation into harassment that forced me to block her phone number and social media accounts. She began showing up at my apartment in Dallas, sometimes drunk, and always demanding that I absolve her of guilt that was preventing her from moving forward with her life. The final confrontation came when Madison enlisted our parents as intermediaries, begging them to convince me to give her another chance at sisterhood. She claimed that my refusal to forgive her was causing ongoing mental health issues that were preventing her recovery from gambling addiction. I explained to Mom and Dad that forgiveness did not require me to restore a relationship with someone who had proven capable of such calculated cruelty. I had forgiven Madison in the sense that I no longer carried anger about her betrayal, but I would not pretend that we could return to being sisters who trusted and supported each other. Madison's response to my boundaries was to attempt manipulation of our parents' emotions, claiming that my rejection was pushing her towards self-harm and making it impossible for her to maintain sobriety from gambling. When Mom called me crying and begging me to reconsider, for Madison's sake, I realized that Madison was still using emotional manipulation to control family dynamics. I arranged a final family meeting where I explained that Madison's recovery was her own responsibility, not something that depended on my participation in rebuilding a relationship she had destroyed. Her continued attempts to make me responsible for her emotional well-being demonstrated that she had not truly accepted accountability for the choices that led to our estrangement. Dad finally understood that Madison's behavior was part of a pattern of avoiding responsibility for her actions by making other people responsible for her emotional stability. He told Madison that she needed to focus on her own healing without expecting forgiveness or reconciliation from the people she had hurt through her deceptive choices. Madison's reaction was to cut contact with our entire family, claiming that we were all toxic and unsupportive of her recovery process. She moved to another state and blocked all of us on social media, apparently deciding that starting over completely was easier than accepting accountability for the relationships her lies had destroyed. The loss of Madison from our family was initially devastating for Mom and Dad, who struggled with guilt about enabling her manipulative behavior through years of rescuing her from consequences. Family therapy helped us process the complicated grief of losing someone who was still alive, but had chosen to remove herself from our lives rather than do the difficult work of earning back trust. For me, Madison's departure brought a sense of peace I had not experienced since her false accusations first shattered my understanding of family loyalty. I no longer had to navigate the emotional minefield of her attempts at manipulation or worry about protecting my parents from her latest crisis. My career in Dallas flourished as I threw myself into work that felt meaningful and surrounded myself with colleagues who appreciated my skills and integrity. The trauma of Madison's betrayal had taught me to value authenticity in relationships and to recognize red flags in people who might use emotional manipulation to get their needs met. I also began volunteering with an organization that supports people who have been falsely accused of abuse, understanding firsthand how devastating such allegations can be to every aspect of someone's life. Helping others navigate similar situations gave me a sense of purpose that transformed my painful experience into something that could benefit other people. The romantic relationship I eventually built was with someone who understood that trust needs to be earned through consistent actions rather than assumed based on family connections or emotional appeals. David and I met through mutual friends who knew my story and respected the boundaries I had learned to establish. 3 years after Madison's false accusations nearly destroyed my life, I can honestly say that I am happier and more fulfilled than I was before the crisis occurred. The experience taught me to value relationships based on mutual respect and honesty, rather than obligation or shared history. Sometimes people ask if I miss having Madison as a sister, and the honest answer is that I miss the sister I thought she was, but not the person she revealed herself to be. The Madison who helped me plan family dinners and shared secrets over frozen yogurt was largely a fiction, a performance designed to maintain access to family resources and emotional support. The real Madison was someone capable of calculating betrayal when she felt it would benefit her, and that person had probably always existed beneath the surface of our seemingly close relationship. Accepting this reality was painful, but ultimately liberating, freeing me from the obligation to maintain a connection with someone who had proven willing to destroy me for personal gain. I learned that family loyalty should not require accepting abuse or manipulation, even from people we love deeply. Protecting yourself from toxic behavior is not cruel or unforgiving. It is necessary for maintaining your own emotional health and integrity. Have you ever had to set boundaries with a family member who was using your love against you? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below, because healing happens when we realize we are not alone in these difficult experiences. Please hit the like button if this story resonated with your own journey toward establishing healthy relationships, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding strength through life's most challenging betrayals. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that it is possible to rebuild after devastating betrayal. And remember that choosing your own well-being is not selfish, it is necessary. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you all the courage to choose truth and authenticity in your own relationships, even when it means walking away from people who cannot love you honestly.